कहाँ खाने?
हेमाकोमा गफ गर्दै चिया खाम न त आज।
हुन्छ ल जाम न त ल।
जाम जाम।
ल जाम जाम।
This episode of Chiya Guff at Oz is brought to you by Alliance Estate Agent. Get in touch with the team at Alliance if you are selling, buying, or want someone to manage your investment property. 910 Finance for your mortgage broking solutions from personalized home loan to business loan and much more. Let's talk number for any tax or accounting related advice and assistance. We also like to thank Mr. Knots and Coffee for their continuing support.
नमस्ते सबैजनालाई चिया गफ एट अजको सिजन 2 एपिसोड 12 मा वेलकम। फर्स्ट अफ अल चाहिँ नि हाम्रो के तिमीले विराटले चाहिँ नि हाम्रो सोसियल मिडियामा चाहिँ कति धेरै मिसक्यारेजको बारेमा कति धेरै लेखेको थियो नि त। त्यसमा चाहिँ नि हाम्रो रेस्पोन्सहरू एकदमै राम्रो आएको थियो होइन। त्यसको लागि थ्याङ्क यू सो मच सबैजनालाई जसरी सपोर्ट गर्नुभएको छ। आई होप कि कमिङ डेजमा फ्युचरमा पनि यसरी नै सपोर्ट हुन्छ भन्ने आशाको साथै आजको गेस्टतिर लागौँ है। आजको गेस्ट चाहिँ नि हामीसँग चाहिँ नि मल्टिकल्चरल सेन्टर फर वुमेन्स हेल्थमा आबद्ध भएर काम गर्नुहुने रोजी अरियल लिज। लाइक थ्याङ्क यू सो मच फर कमिङ है। सो तपाईँ आफ्नो इन्ट्रोडक्सन दिनु नि त ल। तपाईँको रोल अनि पिएचडी गर्दै हुनुहुन्छ होइन। अनि पछि सानो बच्चा छ नि होइन। धन्यवाद भनिदिनु नि त तपाईँको रोलको बारेमा।
Thank you. So first of all, I'll just speak in English. So a bit about myself. My parents are Nepali. They migrated to Australia in 1988. I was born in Nepal and came with them when I was 2 years old in 88, which is why I can understand Nepali, but I don't speak it very well. So they came here. We lived mainly in Hobart in Tasmania. Back then, Hobart was a very different place to what it is now. So not many migrants, not many Nepali people at all. And then I did my university. Then we moved to Sydney, and so I did my year 11 and 12 university years in Sydney. And then I studied anthropology at Sydney Uni, so that's kind of my background. And from there, so I've had kind of a few different career changes. I've worked in the Northern Territory for about 4 years, and then we eventually moved to Melbourne in 2015. So I've been in Melbourne now for 8 years. And I started working at the Multicultural Centre for Women's Health. Yeah. So right now I'm acting as their Research, Advocacy and Policy Manager. And our team does lots of research projects on migrant women's mental health and migrant women's sexual and reproductive health. And we also do quite a lot of advocacy work around that. And the Multicultural Centre for Women's Health, for people who haven't heard of it, so it's a migrant women's organisation. It's a migrant women's health organisation in Victoria, but they also work nationwide. They've been around since the 1970s, so over 40 years now. And when they started in the 70s, how they started was there was a bit of research done in Melbourne showing that migrant women, so at the time that was mainly women from European background, so Italian and Greek women, they tended to work in factories because they were the types of jobs they could get. But they found that migrant women were having a higher rate of abortion than women born in Australia. And the reason for that was that migrant women didn't have access to information about contraception. It's really interesting.
That's a fun fact.
Yes. So, and at that time, so this was the 70s, like the feminist movement was happening, the migrant rights movement was happening, the union, the labour movement was really strong. There was also a strong community health movement. So the idea was to take health out of the clinic. So the idea that not just doctors and medical professionals are experts in health, but actually women themselves are experts in our own health, we're experts in our own bodies. So this, out of this movement in Victoria, like a whole kind of service developed, the women's health services, community health services, this idea that, people are the experts in our own health.
That's nice. Thank you. Thank you for summarizing. And we will be talking half Nepali, half English, right? We should have said at the beginning. But your Nepali is good too.
Thank you.
And tell me a bit about, your PhD. You are doing, particularly in anthropology with Nepalese women to record their stories of migration and advocacy. So how long have you been doing that, and what does the project entails? If you can just provide us a bit of summary.
Yep. So I've actually been doing it since 2018, but because I have 2 young children and I had 3 pregnancies since 2018, so I'm still doing it, and I'm hoping to finish by the start of next year. So I've been interviewing my Nepali migrant women. A lot of them live around this area, around Epping, Wallet, about their experiences during the pandemic. So because I started my PhD in 2018, the project started off as something completely different. I was really hoping for me and my husband, and I had 1 son at the time, I was hoping we could all go to Nepal and I could do a year of research in Nepal. But we were planning to go in August 2020, so obviously the pandemic completely stopped all our plans. And then I changed the project to interview Nepali migrants in Melbourne. And so I'm looking at, so you might know, like the rate of Nepali migration to Australia has really, since 2006 especially, it's like almost doubled at every census. And then between 2016 and the 2021 census, it doubled again. It more than doubled. I think it increased by 124%.
Wow.
Despite the border closures during COVID. So, the rate's been really high. So part of what I'm interested in is what's happening, like what's kind of driving that pattern of migration of young people from Nepal to Australia.
And can I ask you, Hema, when you say record their stories, it's about what their migration story in particular, or what exactly? Is that a survey thing, questionnaire stuff, or how do you do it?
I'm doing individual interviews with people. So normally I've been sitting down with them. We do it in person or in Zoom, like on Zoom, depending on what kind of suits the person. And asking about their families, what kind of motivates you because it's a big, it seems like this pattern, so it seems like, I just kind of migrate away, but actually it's a big deal, that decision to migrate. For lots of young people, especially now with costs of living in Australia, the decision to migrate is tied in with the decision to get married. So they're really kind of big life decisions. So I'm interested in knowing about, what has motivated people to migrate, and why Australia, why not other countries. But also the kind of structural factors. So it's I think for a lot of people I ask, it's kind of obvious to them. They're like, of course I'm going to leave Nepal, that is, but some of the factors in Australia, so Australia's migration system is set up so that we benefit economically from the financial contribution of international students to higher education, from their labour in industries that tend to be underpaid. And so in Australia, we are actually economically and structurally reliant on international students, being underpaid in certain sectors for our economy to stay afloat.
That's spot on.
Before I hand it to Hema, I just want to provide a segue to तपाईँलाई आज ल्याउनुको एउटा प्रमुख कारण के पनि थियो भने I've been trying to do this podcast on miscarriage for a long term.
म त्यसमा जानुभन्दा अगाडि
त्यसमा
जानुभन्दा अगाडि चाहिँ how do you find balance in your life, because you work full time होला हैन?
Oh yeah.
And very PhD and 2 kids.
Yes, so at the moment, so I'm working 4.5 days a week. I've put my PhD on hold while I'm working, so I'm acting in this position while my colleague is on maternity leave. So it was an opportunity to kind of work a bit, have a break from the PhD. But also I should say so I've got at home my husband and my parents, and so we have lots of support with the kids. Otherwise it's very hard. Young ones,
Miscarriage-मा जानुभन्दा अगाडि चाहिँ I was looking the website multicultural Center for Women Health. अनि कति राम्रो कि मलाई थाहा पनि थिएन कि they do free education, health education for women over 40. And they go to you can go to workplace, सबै अब group community group भएर त्यसरी गर्न मिल्ने के
मलाई थाहा थिएन है
वेबसाइट हेरेर. So thank you हैन, मलाई थाहा थिएन because त्यो चाहिँ मैले हेरेपछि चाहिँ म चाहिँ मेरो काममा पनि गर्नु पर्ला यस्तो मेरो त्यो दिमागमा आएको थियो कि हैन. अनि आज चाहिँ हामी पर्टिकुलरली चाहिँ मिसक्यारेजको बारेमा कुरा गर्दैछौँ नि, तर आई थिङ्क मल्टिकल्चरल सेन्टर MCWH चाहिँ नि अब मिसक्यारेज अब किनभने हाम्रो दर्शकबिनहरूलाई चाहिँ हामी मिसक्यारेज पर्टिकुलरली मात्रै गरेको नि तर यसले चाहिँ नि एकदम धेरै भास्ट छ हेल्थ अब जस्तै ब्रेस्ट क्यान्सर सर्भिकल क्यान्सर कति धेरै कुराहरू कभर गर्छ कि होइन अनि हेभ लाइक अ डिफ्रेन्ट ल्याङ्ग्वेज लाइक देस 20+ ल्याङ्ग्वेज मा एभाइलेबल छ होइन तर आज हामी चाहिँ मिसक्यारेजको बारेमा कुरा गर्छौँ विच इज भेरी सेन्सिटिभ अनि हामीसँग टिस्यु बक्स पनि छ यदि बाई चान्स हामी रोएछौँ भने होइन अब चाहिँ हामी कन्टिन्यू गरौँ
न सेगवे राम्रो दियो होइन वी जस्ट वान्टेड टु टक अबाउट मिसक्यारेज टु सो होइन एन्ड हेमा तिमीबाट जाउँ होइन फर्स्ट बिकज यु आर ओपन टु दिस है वाट वाज युर एक्सपिरियन्स अबाउट
म फेरि एकदम इमोसनल मान्छे फेरि होइन मैबाट सुरु गरेकोले मेरो पनि भएको थियो होइन मेरो चाहिँ नि 2टा भयो आई थिङ्क दुईचोटि मिसक्यारेज भयो लाइक मेरो चाहिँ यो मेरो प्यारेन्ट्स इनलजलाई पनि थाहा छैन कि मेरो लास्ट इयर मिसक्यारेज भएको थियो भनेर किनभने त्यो चाहिँ 8 विक्समा भएको थियो कि अनि लास्ट इयर सेप्टेम्बरमा भएको थियो त्यतिखेर र मेरो जुन बेला 2007मा जब म नेपालमा बस्थेँ मेरो फ्यामिलीहरू सराउन्डिङ थियो त्यतिखेर पनि 8 विक्समै मिसक्यारेज भएको त्यो भेरी डिफ्रेन्ट के अनि त्यो बेला त्यो भेरी डिफ्रेन्ट प्लस द सपोर्ट लुक्स भेरी डिफ्रेन्ट छु बिकज त्यो बेलामा जुन बेलामा म 2007मा भएँ त्यो बेला मेरो बच्चा छोरा भएको थिएन होइन मेरो फर्स्ट मिसक्यारेज भएको बेलामा चाहिँ नि द सपोर्ट वाज लाइक सबैजना आएर मसँग रुइदिए हुन्थ्यो भन्ने खालको त्यो खालको सपोर्ट थियो कि होइन सबै आएर चाहिँ नि होइन यो अब नेक्स्ट टाइम भइहाल्छ नि भनेको त्यो चाहिँ मलाई सपोर्ट जस्तो लाग्थ्यो भने जुन लास्ट इयर भयो नि त्यो बेलामा चाहिँ मलाई बोल्न खासै सेयर गर्न मन लाग्थेन कि मान्छेहरूसँग अनि जो मान्छेले आएर मलाई होइन यो त पछि भइहाल्छ नि भन्दाखेरि मलाई त्यो चाहिँ सपोर्ट जस्तो लाग्थेन फेरि एकदम मेबी त्यो डिफ्रेन्ट टाइममा डिफ्रेन्ट सपोर्टको मलाई त्यस्तो फिल भएको थियो
रोजीको के भन्नु छ आई थिङ्क इन डिफ्रेन्ट एक्सपिरियन्स डिफ्रेन्ट मान्छेको हुन्छ होइन मिसक्यारेजमा युजली होइन म पार्टनरको उभा पनि भन्छु अनि आई वान्ट टु सेयर माइन्ड टु बट बिफोर आई गो देयर तिम्रो मिसक्यारेजको कुरा गर्दाखेरि वाट हेल्प यु होइन ब्याक देन द फर्स्ट वानमा चाहिँ केले ओभरकम गर्न तिमीलाई हेल्प गर्यो
फर्स्टमा चाहिँ नि मेरो फ्यामिली नै होला मेरो हस्बेन्ड होइन अनि फ्यामिली मेरो प्यारेन्ट्सहरू सबैजना सायद त्यो नै होला अनि पछि त्यतिखेर चाहिँ नि होप थियो कि म नेक्स्ट बच्चा गर्छु नि त भन्ने थियो नि त तर अब फेरि अस्ट्रेलिया आयो अनि त्यही त हो नि अब इन्टरनेसनल स्टुडेन्ट आयो पढ्यो सबै सेटल डाउन भयो अनि बच्चा भयो त्यो बेलामा चाहिँ नि प्यारेन्ट्स र मेरो पार्टनर नै थियो फर्स्टमा चाहिँ नि भने लास्ट इयरकोमा चाहिँ नि अब मलाई अब नेक्स्ट बच्चा मलाई खासै गर्नु मन छैन भन्ने जस्तो भयो कि किनभने सेकेन्ड टाइम भइसक्यो अब म एभ्री टाइम त म त मेसिन जस्तो मलाई त्यस्तो फिल भयो कि होइन अब म कहाँ अब अरूले अब होइन भइहाल्छ नि भनेर म फेरि गऱ्यो फेरि म के त सेम इमोसनल त्यस्तै भयो भने त थाहा हुँदैन नि त किनभने आई थिङ्क मोर देन 40% वुमेन्सको चाहिँ नि मिसक्यारेज हुन्छ कि बिकज मेबी नेक्स्ट टाइम गर्दा नि फेरि म त्यस्तै भयो भने फेरि म फेरि त्यही इमोसनलबाट जानु पऱ्यो भन्ने भएको थियो कि मलाई चाहिँ नि त्यो भएर सायद मेरो छोरा होला यसपालि चाहिँ नि किनभने मैले चाहिँ मेरो फर्स्ट प्रेग्नेन्ट हुने बेलामा मेरो छोरालाई भनेको थिएँ अब म रुन लागिसकेँ भने चाहिँ मेरो फर्स्ट पर्सन मेरो छोरा म प्रेग्नेन्ट हुन्थेँ छोरालाई भनेको थिएँ अनि मैले ला मैले त्यो भएर मलाई त्यो अनि मिसक्यारेज भइसकेपछि पनि मलाई खासमा डिल गर्न चाहिँ मेरो छोरा थिएँ कि सायद छोरालाई भनिसकेपछि चाहिँ म एकदम ओपन त्यो भएको थिएँ भनौँ न
थ्याङ्क्स फर सेयरिङ एमा टच होइन जसको स्टोरी भयो भने अनि स्पेसली नोइङ पर्सन त्यसको स्टोरी भन्दाखेरि टच भइहाल्छ है एन्ड थ्याङ्क्स फर सेयरिङ है
थ्याङ्क यू
रियली गुड है
अब नेक्स्ट गर्दा
होइन तिमीले त्यो डाटाको कुरा गर्दा अनि रोजीजीलाई सुन्न मन लाग्यो एन्ड डाटा सजेस्टेड न 1 out of 4 in Australia. Is that the valid data?
Yeah. So basically, I think so with miscarriage, as people who have experienced it know, there's no systematic collection of that data. So because a woman, a person who's pregnant might miscarry. They might go to their GP. They might go to emergency. Sometimes people who go to emergency, the doctors might just say, okay, just go home and continue passing the pregnancy at home. And so that data isn't actually collected. But what they think, I think the data they have is 1 in 5 pregnancies miscarriage, which means 1 in 4 women have a miscarriage. But also that data doesn't account for ectopic pregnancies or really early pregnancies where people don't actually know they've miscarried. like if it happens really early on, you might just think you're menstruating. Yeah.
And Rosi, at the beginning, you kind of suggested that you had a 3.
Yes,
and
yeah,
then 2 baby and 3. So I'm just assuming there was an experience.
Yeah, so I also had an experience of miscarriage. So in my experience, so my first pregnancy I was very anxious, I think, like a lot of people when they first get pregnant. I remember like every single day looking at those apps about how your baby should be growing and how you should be feeling. You know, and that pregnancy I was really privileged. It was like a textbook pregnancy. Everything went fine, the birth was fine. And then I got pregnant again probably about 18 months maybe after giving birth to my first child, or a bit less, 16 months or something. And so that time I was like, oh, it all went really well the first time. It's going to be fine. I was not at all worried. My GP suggested I do all the genetic testing, and I said, oh, no, it'll be fine. I'm not going to like pay $300 to do that, you know. But this was the pregnancy. So like when I went in for the 12-week scan, what they found is that the baby was alive at 12 weeks, but it had something called hydrops, which is fluid in the brain, fluid all around the body. And it was, I felt like they didn't give me that much information because I ended up going on Google and doing the Dr. Google search. But so what the information on Google told me was that hydropic babies rarely survive. So if they do survive to full, it's very less chance that they'll survive to full term. If they do survive to full term, less chance that they will survive the birth. If they somehow survive the birth, like they'll only live a few days or weeks. So at that stage, it was really difficult for us because we were kind of, and we did do the genetic testing and it all came back without any results. So it didn't come back positive for anything. So we didn't know why. And I think for a lot of people who miscarry, that not knowing why is really difficult. And so we were kind of in this position of, do we continue with the pregnancy and see what happens, but with this risk that it's just going to get later and later, or do we terminate now? And this was during COVID as well, and we didn't have, so we had a 1-year-old at home. We weren't frontline workers, so we didn't have any childcare. So that was also really
playing a part.
And my, like at the time, all my family are in Sydney. My parents are in Sydney. I've got quite a big family in Sydney, but it was just me and my husband here in Melbourne. So yeah, it was very difficult time. Yeah,
and especially in the COVID time, like in everything, you know,
Yes.
multiplies in many levels. But I was just wanting to know, like in Hema's experience, what as a first pregnancy, right? And yours was second.
Yes.
And you know, and whether that plays, I don't know, like miscarriage is miscarriage.
मेरो थर्डमा भयो नि त
थर्डमा पनि भयो होइन तर अब मैले चाहिँ के बुझ्न खोजेको भने फर्स्टमा हुँदाखेरि चाहिँ जस्तो इम्प्याक्ट पर्छ सेकेन्डमा त्यस्तो पर्दैन कि इज अ फुलिस क्वेसन आई डोन्ट नो जस्ट थ्रोइङ इट आउट देयर डु यु गाइज फिल द सेम कि मिसक्यारेजको इम्प्याक्ट जस्तै हुन्छ
आई थिङ्क इम्प्याक्ट त हुन्छ नि तर अब त्यो आफ्नो सराउन्डिङ कस्तो छ अब त्यति फर्स्टमा चाहिँ नि अब यस्तै एजमा नि होला फरक पर्ने किनभने एज
कति
म्याच्योर छ भने पनि हुन त म्याच्योर त मतलब हुँदैन होला मेरो विचारमा होइन तर आई थिङ्क इज इमोसनल लाइक यु नो इज आई थिङ्क इज गन बी सेम बट हाउ यु ह्यान्डल त्यो फरक पर्छ
तिमीलाई एउटा पर्सनल किन मिसक्यारेजकै कुरा छ तिम्रो फर्स्ट चौथो तेस्रो हुँदाखेरि चाहिँ भनौँ न डिड यु फिल म्याच्युरिटी थियो त्यहाँ डिड द्याट हेल्प टु ओभरकम आई नो तिमीलाई चाहिँ मान्छेहरूले आएर सोध्यो भने नसोधेको भए हुन्थ्यो मलाई एन्सर दिन मन छैन भन्ने त त्यो पर्यो थियो तर तिम्रो म्याच्युरिटीले तिमीलाई केही सिकाइरहेको थियो मैले पहिले जे गरेँ म यो गर्दिनँ अथवा म यो यसरी चाहिँ ह्यान्डल गर्छु भनेर के
त्यो सिचुएसनमा त्यस्तो हुँदैन होला मेरो विचारमा त
something here the context was very different because first time you're in Nepal and you said the second time you didn't feel like even sharing or talking about it
मलाई खासै सेयर गर्न मन थिएन अनि अब जस्तो तिमी पनि आएको थियो नि त घरमा होइन अब जस्तै अब जो पनि आएर अनि डक्टरकोमा जिपीकोमा गएँ होइन अनि खासमै चाहिँ स्क्यानको बेलामै हार्टबिट देखेन अनि त्यहाँ चाहिँ ब्लिडिङ भयो नि त ब्लिडिङ भयो अनि जिपीले पनि एकदम नर्मल तरिकाले के उसले चाहिँ अब त्यो लाइक मेन्टल लाइक इमोसनली सपोर्ट होइन कि यु क्यान ट्राई नेक्स्ट टाइम यति हो के भनेको मलाई के त्यस्तो केही सपोर्ट त्यस्तो दिएको थिएन तर म एक्लै पनि गएको थिएँ होइन भने ओके म नेक्स्ट टाइम गर्दिनँ भनेर भनेर आएँ कि अनि पछि अनि फेरि नेक्स्ट टाइम जाँदाखेरि उसले चाहिँ नि त्यस्तै कुरा गर्यो मलाई चाहिँ होइन मैले चाहिँ पप्पी लिएँ अब चाहिँ म पप्पी नै खुसी छु भनेर भने ऊ हाँस्यो कि ममा के त्यस्तो गरेर तर जे होस् अब मलाई चाहिँ नि सेकेन्ड टाइममा चाहिँ नि मेरो साथीहरू आएर चाहिँ नि होइन ठिकै छ नि त किनभने सबैलाई सेयर गरेको थिएन सर्टेन फ्रेन्डलाई मात्रै के अरे थाहा थियो नि त आएर उनीहरू कुरा गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ नि मलाई अब होइन भइहाल्छ नेक्स्ट टाइम ट्राई गर न भन्दाखेरि चाहिँ मलाई त्यो चाहिँ मेरो लागि सपोर्ट होइन त्यो फिल भएको थियो कि त्यो बेलामा
अब त्यो कुरामा चाहिँ म के आउँछु भने यो मिसक्यारेजको कुरा वाल आई वाज रिसर्चिङ होइन द वान अफ द थिङ पिपल डोन्ट नो हाउ टु टक अबाउट मिसक्यारेज लाइक दे डोन्ट नो हाउ टु एप्रोच होइन I might know, you had a miscarriage or you had a miscarriage, but the problem, I'm not saying myself, but I'm just saying in common terms, in the society, because it's a very sensitive topic, and especially we are talking about male and female versus female and female. And also, the first thing is people don't know how to talk, and the people say things like, भइहाल्छ नि मैले पनि भने होला कतिजनालाई होइन भइहाल्छ नि अर्को चाहिँ ट्राई गर्दा के फरक पर्छ र होइन not knowing what they are going through. Again, and do you have to say anything about that? Like, what do you think about?
I think also like when I had mine, I joined this group. So first of all, I'll just say I ended up miscarrying at around 18 weeks, and so I joined this group on Facebook for second trimester pregnancy loss. That was actually a really supportive. I got a lot of support from that group and so much validation because, it doesn't feel supportive. People say, oh, it'll happen next time. Or in my case, it was a second pregnancy. So they said, you've already got a child. And all that stuff it doesn't validate your grief and what you're going through at the time. I think the things people can say to be supportive is to acknowledge that it's really sad, to ask the person what they need, to understand. The other thing is a lot of women after they've had a miscarriage, and I know I felt like this, it's hard to see a baby. It's hard to go to like a pasni or a doijura, like seeing like pregnant women. This is for women who have had a miscarriage or also are struggling with fertility as well. Like those things are hard, and as a society, I think we just have to understand that. So understand, if someone says they don't feel like coming to a party or something like that, or being around young children.
And I think we also come from the society that we always have to make this comment of if they are married, we expect bacha kaile huncha. If they have first bacha, arko bacha kaile huncha. If they have a miscarriage, yo ta kehi bhayni haina, 9 वटा miscarriage bhayo थियो मेरो पहिले मेरो आमाको पालामा, this is nothing. I think we come from that society too, but probably this is why we are having this conversation too. मेरो केसमा चाहिँ I think there is a partner's role too. Okay, first I just wanted to highlight. Sorry, we are just talking about miscarriage. So how did you feel supported from your husband? Like did you thought that he understood you completely when it comes to miscarriage?
Yeah, I was really lucky. Like I did, because he was there throughout the whole process. So because it was COVID, the first appointment he wasn't allowed in, but then the second appointment when we found out about the heartbeat, he was there, and then. They ended up, I had to go to the maternity ward and they induced me and I gave birth. So this is one thing, because we never talk about miscarriage. I had no idea that basically at any stage when you miscarry, you will pass the baby. If it's at an earlier stage, it's very small. But at 18 weeks, it was a fully, she came out, she was a girl, she was a fully formed baby. And I actually had no idea, because of the lack of information, that was what was going to happen.
So you never expected that? Nobody prepared you for that?
No, so I didn't know until we'd known that the baby had died, that okay, now I'm going to go into labour and give birth. This is what's going to happen. But then just a content warning for listeners, but I didn't realise that then. I didn't know, would the baby come out as a whole baby? Would it come out in pieces? I actually, I just had no idea. And I think it's because as a society we don't talk about it. But sorry, to get back to your point, my partner was there when I was giving birth, because I went into labour, had the contractions, not as intensely as if it was a full-term labour, but so he was there the entire time. And I think because he was there, he was kind of in it with me. I do think from his perspective he felt a bit it's a bit awkward, right? Like, because you go in, like, the person giving birth is the patient, the midwives were all kind of really sympathetic to me. I mean, I'm kind of interested to hear from you.
No, I really think the impact of miscarriage on women is more than their partner. I think that's the case, because no matter how much I want to help my partner to overcome a grief, to overcome a attachment, you know, to maintain emotional distance, whatever you call it, but I think I don't think you would understand the impact fully, and that's the reason. In my case, I was just there to listen, and I've never asked until now whether that helped or not. I think in my experience, I think she had to, and it's not I think, she had to, and it was back to back, and first was discussed, second was not discussed, just because when you had first, the second one, you always have that mindset of, it's going to happen again, finger crossed, and it happened. And you know, and after that we are, so technically, like, you know, the fourth one, you know, is the second son, so in a second it's child, so between the first and the fourth we had 2 miscarriages, and I think it took the emotional toll on her a lot, and as a partner, I think there is this is what I want to say, like, you know, I'm not going to say what I did was good or not good, or what your husband did, and I will come to you, Hema, too, but I think sometimes we don't know how to work around the grief and the miscarriage with your partner, but just being there to listen, that help in many ways. And I was just looking at the articles and things like that for this podcast, and you know, and the majority of time the first rule is just be there. Just listen to her, you know. And I thought I did that, and there was other things too which I didn't know, like, you know, which I didn't know. I never Googled, and this is another thing I always regretted, like, you know, I never Googled or wanted to upskill myself to help her out, you know, in a specific expertise way, but I could have easily done that too, like, you know, why I didn't do it, I don't know, okay. But I think as a partner, if your partner is going through the miscarriage, the best thing you could do is just be there, give her a time, listen to her, you know, and probably, and if she's not engaging, do not engage. That's another thing. If she probably, you know, if she doesn't want to engage, she doesn't want to engage just because she might need a bit of time, हैन. तिम्रो पनि त्यस्तै भएको थियो, हेमा, तिम्रो कस्तो भएको थियो, कस्तो थियो पार्टनरको रोल, कस्तो थियो तिम्रो बोथ मिसक्यारेजमा, सुनौँ न.
फर्स्टमा चाहिँ नि एकदमै इन्भल्भड, हैन, होल फ्यामिली, लाइक बोथ साइड फ्यामिली, इट वाज लाइक एकदम ग्रिफ, लाइक रोछ सबैजना के है, सबैजना मम्मी र बाबा पनि घरमा आउनुभयो, अनि सबैजना एकदमै के रोयो होइन. त्यतिखेर चाहिँ एकदम अब उसले चाहिँ नि हस्पिटलहरू खोजेर कता अब हुन्छ नि अब सफा गर्नु पर्यो, त्यो गर्नको लागि सबै गऱ्यो, ऊ चाहिँ एकदम इन्भल्भ भएको थियो होइन. अनि सेकेन्डमा चाहिँ नि आई थिङ्क हि न्यू कि मलाई चाहिँ नि बोल्नु छैन धेरै, त्यही भएर उसले चाहिँ नि उसको स्पेस, उसले हुन्छ मलाई स्पेस दियो कि मलाई चाहिँ नि बढी अब यसको बारेमा केही कुरा गर्नु छैन, एन्ड आई डोन्ट वान्ट एनी मोर चाइल्ड. मलाई चाहिँ त्यो अब त्यो चाहिँ मेरो माइन्ड सेटअप भएको भएर ऊ चाहिँ नि एकदम क्लियर थियो कि समटाइम्स लिसन मात्रै होइन कि उसलाई मान्छेलाई स्पेस दिनुपर्छ, लाइक वाट्स यु वान्ट, लाइक सपोर्ट्स लुक्स डिफ्रेन्ट, सबै मान्छेमा डिफ्रेन्ट हुन्छ नि त, त्यही भएर यु निड टु अब हुन्छ नि बुझ. समटाइम्स आई डोन्ट वान्ट से वाट काइन्ड अफ सपोर्ट आई निड, लाइक पार्टनरले चाहिँ नि त्यसरी नै अब बुझेर.
आई थिङ्क रोजीले भने नि भ्यालिडेट कसरी हुन्छ भन्ने कुरा हो, बिकज यु वेन्ट टु द फेसबुक पेज एन्ड यु फिल सो भ्यालिडेटेड, एन्ड हेमाज केस इन नेपाल वाज सो भ्यालिडेटिङ टु, नट द सेम विथ द सेकेन्ड वान, बट भ्यालिडेट इन अ सेन्स द्याट, यु नो, आफूलाई चाहिँ आनन्द कताबाट प्राप्त गर्छ त्यो जर्नी बिताउनलाई, होइन.
सेकेन्ड वान टु, तर मलाई किनभने त्यसमा मलाई भ्यालिडेट त्यसरी नै चाहिएको थियो नि त, आई डोन्ट वान्ट टक टु मच.
तर त्यो मान्छेले बुझेन भन्न खोजेको, समाजले चाहिँ त्यो बुझेन नि त, होइन र.
साथीभाइले बुझेन, पार्टनरले चाहिँ बुझेको थियो, पार्टनरले बुझेको थियो.
अनि हेमा तिम्रो स्पेसिफिक क्वेसन थियो 6 weeks र 12 weeks, डज द्याट डु यु वान्ट आस्क?
अनि त्यो चाहिँ एकदम राम्रो क्वेसन कि त्यो चाहिँ नि, होइन. 6 weeks 12 weeks, किनभने समटाइम्स चाहिँ नि अब हाम्रो प्रायः सबैजना लेडिजहरूले चाहिँ 12 weeks नभएसम्म त हामीले बाहिर खुलाउँदैन नि त, अब अरूहरूलाई भन्दैन त. त्यो चाहिँ अब आफू भयो, अब प्रेग्नेन्ट भयो, अनि मिसक्यारेज भयो, 8 weeks, अब हुन्छ म 8 weeks भएँ नि भनेपछि त्यो चाहिँ नि कसरी आउट गर्ने त्यो हुन्छ नि.
Yeah, this is so like, you mean how do you tell people because you haven't even told them that you're pregnant? Yep. So I think there are ways to tell people. You could take them aside quietly. So depending on who it is, you know, if it's like especially at work, for instance. So if you need a few days off, I mean, at work you can just get a medical certificate. You don't actually have to tell them if you're not comfortable. But if you've got friends who you think you can support you can tell them quietly and say, I want to share this with you. Do it that way. But actually what I really want to say on this is I feel like as an entire society we have to challenge this 12-week this 12-week rule because one of the things it does is, and I think in Nepal people follow it, in Australia people follow it, but what it means is that then when you go through this grief, nobody knows that you're pregnant and you're isolated, so it actually isolates the person who's pregnant and their partner. So I just, for all my pregnancies, I've said to people as soon as I found out, not kind of announced it on Facebook, but I have made sure my close friends know. And then when I did have the miscarriage, I updated them throughout what was happening. I just think we need a revolution. And
ट्रु होला मलाई, किनभने नि अब हुन पनि हो नि त, अब थाहा छैन भने त अब उनीहरूले कसरी गर्ने, अनि नेक्स्ट टाइम अब जस्तै अब मेरो इनलज प्यारेन्ट्सले त भन्नु हुँदैन, तर पनि हुन्छ नि सेकेन्ड बेबी, अब उनीहरूलाई भित्रको कुरा थाहा छैन कि अब मिसक्यारेज भइसक्यो भने त्यो किप सेइङ, अनि त्यो त ट्रिगर पोइन्ट हुन्छ नि त, फेरि नेक्स्ट टाइम भन्दाखेरि चाहिँ नि झन् त्यो आउँछ.
And this is a very good segue, Rosi. What do you think we need to do about especially your acceptance, society ma acceptance garnako लागि हामीले चाहिँ के गर्न पर्छ होला? What are the things you can quickly think? हेमालाई पनि है, just किनभने because you have got a lived experience हैन, के कुराले चाहिँ सोसाइटी भनेपछि I don't want to go back to Nepal हैन, सोसाइटी हाम्रो यहाँ पनि सोसाइटी छ, we are talking about friends, families, are the Nepalese, Aussie पनि होला हैन, अनि I just want to ask your perspective on हैन, what are the things we could change, revolutionize हैन, so that it will be normalized a bit.
I think so first, talking about learning about miscarriage. So I said, I didn't even know what happens during miscarriage. And then, but if you're comfortable, I know not everyone's comfortable sharing about their pregnancy before 12 weeks. But the reason we're not comfortable is because we live in a society that thinks we're weird, or that thinks we're being brave for sharing our pregnancy before 12 weeks or something. So being open to listening to people and supporting people, and being non-judgmental. So especially those questions around, when are you going to have another baby? Don't you want a boy, or don't you want to try for a girl? All these sorts of questions that people just ask, it rolls off their tongue, and they don't stop to think what the impact of the question is.
मैले चाहिँ एउटा प्र्याक्टिस हालसालै गर्न थालेको छु कि अब स्टप आस्किङ माई फ्रेन्ड वेन यु क्यान ह्याभ बेबी, ओके, बिकज एउटा चाहिँ मेरो भ्यालिडेसन चाहिँ के छ भने मेबी दे आर गोइङ थ्रु सम जर्नी देमसेल्फ हैन, अनि मेबी दे डोन्ट वान्ट इट हैन, अनि त्यो भनेको हरेक कुरा मैले क्वेसन सोद्धाखेरि उनीहरूलाई चाहिँ कस्तो सिचुएसनमा पार्छु भने दे हेभ टु आइदर भ्यालिडेट or debate हैन, अनि why I'm doing that, त्यो सिङ्गल क्वेसनले हैन, अनि probably I think everybody needs to, हाम्रो त्यो I know नेपाली माइन्डसेट स्टिल छ कि है हाम्रो त्यो सोध्ने कुरा भनेर के. हेमालाई चाहिँ सोधौँ न त, सोसाइटी what do you think would probably we need to do to talk about in a whole normalize गर्नलाई मिसक्यारेजलाई के कुराले सहयोग गर्छ होला?
I think same, because मैले पनि 12 weeks भएपछि भन्छु भनेर बसेको थिएँ नि त, अब 12 weeks अब नहुँदै भइगयो, त्यो भएर चाहिँ आई थिङ्क त्यो 12 weeks भने यो सेट हामी यो छ नि, यो टाइम लिमिट के भने यो चाहिँ नि सायद त्यो रिमुभ गरेर चाहिँ हामीले ओपन अप हुनुपर्छ होला कि. त्यो भयो भने मान्छेले सोध्ने क्वेसनहरू त्योहरू मान्छेले बुझ्छ कि, अन्डरस्ट्यान्डिङ, बिकज वी आर ओपन टु पिपल, सो द्याट वी इन्भाइट हामीले अब मान्छेलाई ओपन भएर भनेपछि उनीहरूले पनि त बुझ्छ नि त. इफ वी आर क्लोजिङ आवर सेल्फ भनेपछि हामी, एन्ड वी क्यान एक्सपेक्ट देम टु अन्डरस्ट्यान्ड अस. आई थिङ्क द्याट्स द मेन थिङ.
तर मेरो एउटा कुरा चाहिँ नबुझेको कुरा है, अब जस्तो रोल अफ सोसल नेटवर्कको कुरा गर्दाखेरि अघि नै भनिहालेँ नि होइन, देयर इज अलवेज अ फाइन ब्यालेन्स बिट्विन टेलिङ पिपल, टेल गऱ्यो भने सोसल नेटवर्क बढ्छ प्रेग्नेन्सीको बेलामा होइन, मिसक्यारेज हुनुभन्दा अगाडि, टेल गरेन भने सोसल नेटवर्क कम भइरहेको हुन्छ होइन, एज यु सेड होइन, अनि त्यो फाइन ब्यालेन्स चाहिँ कसरी आउँछ त त्यसो भए त भन्नाले मैले भन्न खोजेको होइन, आम नट थिङ्किङ अबाउट मिसक्यारेज, प्रेग्नेन्ट छ भन्न मन लाग्यो, तर एट द मेन टाइम यु हेभ गट अ फियर अन यर सेल्फ होइन, केही भइहाल्यो भनेर त्यसलाई चाहिँ फाइन ब्यालेन्स कसरी गरिन्छ होला त?
For me, maybe you can be a bit strategic about it. So, for instance, all the times that I've been pregnant, I have been comfortable telling my employers and my supervisors at uni. I'm
nice.
very lucky that I've got that environment. But the reason I told them is because anyone who's pregnant knows early pregnancy is actually really hard. And you're exhausted. It's hard to work. You're really fatigued. You're nauseous. So I kind of thought, all right, I'm going to tell them that I'm pregnant because I might need to take days off. I might need to reduce my workload. And then I also, but for my close friends, I think I told the people that I knew could support me if something happened.
स्पेसली यो हाम्रो कन्टेक्स्टमा त यो किन जरुरी छ भने हामीसँग भनौँ न यहाँ आइसकेपछि त्यही सोसल नेटवर्क छैन नि त हामीले चिनेको 4-5 जना 10-12 जना हुन्छ हैन अनि त्यो 10-12 जनामा अब कसलाई भन्ने हैन 1-2 जनालाई भनेर चाहिँ सजिलो हुन्छ भने त्यही भनेको के फाइन ब्यालेन्स चाहिँ कहाँनेर हुन्छ भन्नु खोजेको के मैले बट आई थिंक रोजी काइन्ड अफ आन्सर
अनि मेरो एउटा उस छ कि हैन हुन त त्यो तिमीले भने जस्तै हैन मेरो सेकेन्ड प्रेग्नेन्सी जब मेरो छोरा भएको बेलामा पनि I was very open to मेरो म्यानेजरलाई अनि मेरो साथी जो क्लोज साथी छ कामको साथीहरूलाई अनि त्यो बेला पनि मेरो एकदम राम्रो के अरे प्रेग्नेन्सी भएको होइन कि एकदम अप्स एन्ड डाउन भएको थियो होइन अनि दे वाज सो सपोर्टिभ कि मेरो 8 विक्समा ब्लिडिङ भएको थियो मलाई अब ब्लिडिङ हुँदा हुँदा म अब रुँदै काम गरिरहेको छु कि किनभने मैले अरूलाई त सबैलाई त सेयर गरेको थिएन सबैजना मलाई आएर सोध्ने कि के भन्छ म चाहिँ अब बसेर गरिरहेछ होइन तर मेरो म्यानेजरलाई थाहा थियो नि त अनि मेरो मिल्ने साथीलाई थाहा थियो नि त अनि उनीहरूले अब डक्टर उस गरेर अनि मलाई उनीहरूले लिएर गए कि त्यो भए चाहिँ आई थिङ्क ओपन हुनुपर्छ र मेरो फाइन लाइनको कुरामा चाहिँ के भन्छ मेरो यो सेकेन्ड मिसक्यारेज थर्ड प्रेग्नेन्सीमा चाहिँ नि किनभने म चाहिँ अब हामी इडब्लुएनसीमा हामीले गर्थ्यौँ नि त उसले चाहिँ पढाउँछ मैले डान्स गराउँथेँ नि त होइन अनि सायद अब त्यही त हो नि अब मेरो मिल्ने साथीहरूलाई भने तर के भन्दा मेरो छोराले पनि यता भने यता यस्तो अब ऊ पनि एकदम खुसी थियो कि होइन त्यो गर्दा क्लासमा स्कुलमा चाहिँ के हल्ला भयो भन्दाखेरि चाहिँ नि हेमा मिस चाहिँ नि प्रेग्नेन्ट छ त्यो हल्ला भइगयो नि त
एक्सिडेन्टल सोसल नेटवर्क भयो
होइन त्यो हल्ला भइगयो अनि त्यसपछि अनि लास्ट टाइम म पार्टीमा दुईवटा इन्सिडेन्ट 3टा इन्सिडेन्ट भन्छ एक्चुअली होइन अब त्यो चाहिँ अब बोर्डर लाइन चाहिँ कहिलेकाहीँ चाहिँ नि नहुँदो रहेछ कि त्यो गर्न खोज्दाखेरि पनि हुँदैन कि होइन अनि एउटा पार्टीमा गयो हामी होइन एउटा पार्टीमा गएपछि एकजना अब उहाँको बच्चा चाहिँ आउनुहुन्छ होइन आएर चाहिँ मलाई सोध्नु भयो कि अनि तिमी प्रेग्नेन्ट छैन भनेर भन्नुभयो कि मलाई अब मेरो साथीहरूको टेबलमा बसिरहेको थिएँ छैन मैले त्यसरी भने होइन बच्चाको नाम लिएर अनि बच्चाले भनेको त प्रेग्नेन्ट छ भन्थ्यो त यसरी भन्नुभयो कि अनि मैले म छैन म प्रेग्नेन्ट छैन तर मेरो सानो पप्पी चाहिँ नि छ 6 मन्थ्सको पप्पी छ भनेर भने मैले होइन त्यो एउटा भयो इन्सिडेन्स सेकेन्ड इन्सिडेन्स अगेन सेम बच्चाको बाबा अनि सेकेन्ड बेबी चाहिँ कस्तो छ भनेर सोध्नु भयो कि मलाई मैले होइन मेरो सेकेन्ड बेबी छैन तर मेरो पप्पी चाहिँ घरमा छ भनेर भने कि त्यो भयो होइन थर्डमा चाहिँ नि आई थिङ्क त्यो सायद मेरो एकदम त्यो दिमागमा हार्टमा बसेको कुरा चाहिँ नि अब हाम्रो त्यो केक काट्ने बेलामा के गर्ने बेलामा समथिङ के गर्ने बेलामा हाम्रो इडब्लुएनसीको के गर्ने बेलामा चाहिँ नि दाइहरूले चाहिँ नि के भन्नुभएको थियो कि अब म चाहिँ मेरो मिसक्यारेज भइसक्यो अब हुन्छ प्रेग्नेन्ट भएर जान लागेको त्यस्तो के भन्नुभयो जस्तो लाग्थ्यो कि म दाइले अनि म त मिसक्यारेज भइसक्यो यसो भएको थियो कि म चाहिँ नि त्यो भएर होइन एनाउन्स गर्नुभएको होइन साइड इनसाइड मात्र हामी बोलिरहेको थियो फाइन लाइन चाहिँ नि कहिलेकाहीँ चाहिँ हुँदैन गर्न खोज्दाखेरि पनि कहिलेकाहीँ हुँदैन
स्ट्राटेजिकली आई थिङ्क बोथ अफ यु आई थिङ्क द्याट वाज आई डोन्ट नो कन्सियसली अनकन्सियसली गर्यो होइन तर स्ट्राटेजिकल के गर्यो भने आई थिङ्क टेलिङ यु इम्प्लोयर अलवेज इज हेल्पफुल यु बोथ डिड द सेम यु नो एन्ड देन प्रोबेबली द्याट गो हेड ओके
And can I just say one more thing about just creating in general a society that's supportive around this is I think part of the reason is when you have a miscarriage you often blame yourself and I think some of the social conversations that have around miscarriage do actually blame the woman. So I don't know what the word for miscarriage is in Nepali. But do you know the word? That's okay. But in English, miscarriage means like the woman's body has not carried the baby properly, so her body is to blame, which isn't the case medically. It's never your fault if you've had a miscarriage. But it just goes to show like the kind of language and the culture, the way we talk about it is victim blaming. Right? blames the person who's pregnant. So a lot of actually like feminists advocate to, rather than using the word miscarriage, they call it spontaneous abortion.
Okay.
So if you ever hear that term, that's where it comes from. It's trying to take the blame away from the person who's pregnant. But like in general, that's just one example of how our whole conversations and our language and our culture around miscarriage tend to blame the person. Now, to change that.
No, I think that's a very valid point, right? Rosi, I just want to go more into data now. Like, do you have any of the data to suggest, or any of the study to suggest, like, how the pregnancy rate is, especially in the CALD community? Have there been any study or research been done? Because I'm just assuming that it's very hard to get a Nepali specific one. But even with the, what have you got from the research point of view? And thank you, by the way, both for sharing your personal story. You didn't have to do that, but thank you for sharing.
So the data on the CALD community, so what the data comes from is whether a woman was born in Australia or not. And what that data says is that 1/3 of women giving birth in Australia, the proportion of mothers from overseas giving birth is increasing in Australia. So proportionately, people born overseas give birth more than people born.
Oh, so the comparative kind of
मैले सुरुमा त्यो भन्दा अगाडि चाहिँ काल्ड त्यो भनेको चाहिँ के हो त्यो पनि बुझाइदिनु किनभने कतिजनालाई चाहिँ थाहा छैन नि त लिसनरहरूलाई.
So actually that's why I made that distinction between people born overseas and CALD. So CALD, CALD, stands for culturally and linguistically diverse. So it's a term used by government and lots of organisations to kind of talk about people who are non-white. So it's a very problematic term. It's because it implies that if you're white, you're kind of normal and you're not diverse and you don't have any culture and you don't have a language. And then if you're not white, you are like, you have culture and you have language. And you're somehow not normal. You're diverse from the norm. Does that make sense? So it's quite problematic. And the data that we have on pregnancy and giving birth comes from whether that person is born in Australia or born overseas. So that data doesn't differentiate. So, for instance, that person could be born in Australia, but they might have Nepali parents, or they might have migrant parents, or a person who was born overseas might still come from an English-speaking background and have kind of all the privileges that entails in Australia. So the data doesn't exactly match.
Cool. Now coming back to the data about the
so
people born overseas now.
So there's no kind of systematic data collected around that, but what we do know is that migrant women predominantly have worse pregnancy and maternal health outcomes than Australian-born women. And that's because they experience a number of systemic issues. So, for instance, visa precarity is one. So that means when you're on a temporary visa, you don't have access to Medicare. If you're a student and in your first 12 months in Australia, your health insurance doesn't cover any pregnancy care at all. But even if you do have permanent residency, say, as we all know, the Australian health system is quite difficult to navigate if you're new to it. And migrant and refugee women tend to access antenatal care a bit later on. And so like that antenatal care means your health appointments during pregnancy. And what the data does show is that the earlier you start antenatal care, the more likely you are to have better maternal child health outcomes. And unfortunately for miscarriage, so there's no data around miscarriage. But there is data for stillbirth. So in terms of stillbirth, the stillbirth rate...
Can you explain stillbirth?
Sorry. So miscarriage is if you lose the baby between 1 to 20 weeks gestation. Stillbirth is defined from 20 weeks onwards if you lose the baby. And often So basically, in Australia has quite a high rate of stillbirth compared to similar OECD countries. So about 6 babies are stillborn each day in Australia, which is
Six
per day.
Per
day, yeah, it's quite high given that we don't have a huge population. But for babies of mothers who were born overseas, the stillbirth rate is higher.
Okay.
And
so just to summarize, I think the rate is higher anyway, but on top of that, if you are from overseas, mom, the rates are even higher on that population or cohort. Okay.
And if you're from South Asia, the stillbirth rates are like higher as well.
Okay, so we're at the top of the list when it comes to the
towards the top. Okay.
Probably that could be a separate podcast, but I was just wondering, what, stillbirth, why the rates are a bit higher.
I think, I was going to say, maybe one of the things is language, is a different, and people don't have confidence to go and talk. If something's happened, अवस्था अलिकति ओके अगेन म नेपालीमा भन्छु होइन अवस्था अब 8 विक्समा ब्लड आयो भने होइन अलिकति ब्लड त आउँछ नै यस्तो भन्ने हुन्छ नि त अब अलिकति आएको त केही पनि होइन वी डोन्ट गो टु सिक हेल्प सुरुमै जबसम्म आउँदैन तबसम्म चाहिँ नि जाँदैन नि त सायद त्यस्तो हाम्रो कल्चर ट्रेडिसन हामीले त्यस्तै सुन्दै आएको थियो अनि त सायद त्यही नै हामीले फलो गरेर नै होला कि कन्फिडेन्स छैन अगाडि गएर अब बोल्नलाई डक्टरसँग जानलाई भन्नलाई हुन्छ नि यो भइहाल्छ यो भन्ने कुरा पनि होला
there's that. There's also in the healthcare system itself there's the data that they use. So say one really good example of this is typically the common knowledge is that a pregnancy goes for 40 weeks, right? But actually recent data indicates that for South Asian women, a typical pregnancy is 39 weeks. So this is why South Asian women likely might have higher rates of stillbirth because once it goes from 39 to 40 weeks, they're at much higher risk, but the hospital doesn't treat them as high risk because for the hospital, it's the 40-week mark that is risky, right? And this happens across health data and the way they set up the goalposts almost, that the studies are all done in Western countries with Caucasian people, and so the benchmarks that they use don't account for
You don't consider that
for diversity. I know some hospitals now. So I gave birth at Monash Women's. They were bringing, if you're from South Asia, they bring you in from 39 weeks for fetal monitoring. If you're from anywhere else, they bring you in at 40 weeks.
यो चाहिँ म नेपालीमै भने बिकज आम सोसल वर्क इन हस्पिटल सेटिङ है मलाई चाहिँ कस्तो लाग्छ भने नि एन्टिनेटल भिजिट इज भेरी इम्पोर्टेन्ट होइन मेनी अफ द हस्पिटल होइन इभन दो यु डोन्ट हेभ अ भ्यालिड भिजा इभन दो यो इन्सुरेन्स इज नट कभरिङ त्यो कारणले चाहिँ एन्टिनेटल भिजिट नजानु चाहिँ नगरौँ बिकज के हुन्छ भने सोसल वर्कर तपाईँले एन्टिनेटल भिजिटमा माग्नुभयो भने दे विल फाइन्ड अ वे आउट है दे विल फाइन्ड अ वे आउट आई थिङ्क एन्ड इट डजन्ट मिन द्याट एभ्री हस्पिटल विल डु इट है बट के भन्न खोजेको भने कहिलेकाहीँ कम्युनिकेसनले पनि यु क्यान फाइन्ड एन आउटकम ओके तर मेरो भएन मेरो त्यो भएन भनेर चाहिँ कन्ट्याक्ट गर्न नजाने त्यो डर चाहिँ नराखौँ भन्न खोजेको कि बिकज आई थिङ्क वान्स पिपल नो यो स्टोरी know your journey, they might be more, I think, अलि हेल्प गर्नलाई अलि उत्सुक हुन्छ जस्तो लाग्छ कि मलाई चाहिँ त्यही भएर प्लिज अनि अर्को कुरा हेमाले भनेकोमा ल्याङ्ग्वेज ब्यारियर वाट डु थिङ्क अबाउट द्याट रोजी आई डोन्ट थिङ्क मेनी अफ दिस इन्फर्मेसन पर्टिकुलरली अबाउट मिसक्यारेज द रिस्क वेन इट ह्यापन्स हाउ कमन इट इज द्याट्स नट इन अ डिफरेन्ट ल्याङ्ग्वेज or is it? Are they produced in a different language and been provided at different times? Were you guys aware of that? While you had your own experience, like did someone explain to you? It's not that you required, but did you had a bit of awareness that that the information is already out there? Kind of no.
No, not. I mean, I like. English is kind of my first language and I didn't know, like I said, I didn't know the basic facts about miscarriage. So even in English, I don't think that information is there. I know, I mean, actually at MCWH, we're working with the government to produce some healthy pregnancy resources in different languages. So I know that slowly that information is getting out. But I actually think it's also about... like health workers have to be willing to use interpreters, for instance. People, you do have a right if you go to hospital to ask for an interpreter, and often people won't do that, or the doctors don't think it's necessary. So there are ways around that language barrier.
I think the common theme which we are talking about in miscarriage and support is a language barrier, not having information in their own language, like even the not having information at all, on top of that not having a information in your own language.
अनि अर्को एउटा कुरा भन्छु म, सरी फेरि तिमीलाई काटेँ होइन. आई थिङ्क किन हाई छ भन्दाखेरि पनि अब जस्तै अब people who born here, उनीहरू चाहिँ अलरेडी सेटल डाउन भइसकेको हुन्छ नि त, उनीहरूको फ्यामिली सपोर्ट हुन्छ नि त. तर जो चाहिँ नि अब माइग्रेन्ट रिफ्युजीहरू छ, उनीहरू त नि उनीहरूले स्ट्रगल गर्नुपर्छ नि त. अब उनीहरू अब प्रेग्नेन्सीमा चाहिँ कम्प्लिकेसन केही आएको छ भने पनि उनीहरू स्टप गरेर काम रोक्न अलिकति उनीहरू सबै अब मिलाउनु पर्छ नि त. सायद त्यो पनि होला.
So it's that's a really good point, that the barriers for people, it's not just because they don't speak English, it's actually that the system doesn't support them. And I think it's the healthcare system, like the onus should be on the healthcare system to be able to support people who speak multiple languages.
I agree. And yes, my shout out, I know there was an incident, there was a story someone sent, and I was very pleased. I think she has beautifully written. I think she wrote a sentence saying then she found out the Australian health system was the same, just because she went to ED because she had a miscarriage, and after a couple of hours of wait, she was in agonizing pain, and she was just told, you have a miscarriage, go home. And then she realized, and she still had a hope. So she went to, and she was given an indone. Actually, I remember the story now. She was given an indone, and she didn't take it because she's a nurse background. So she went back GP with the hope that that news was false. And it touched me in many levels. But I think that's the thing. Like before the miscarriage too, there are so many barriers. But after the miscarriage too, when we talk about how to appropriately provide that support, like I don't know, can I quickly, because I know we are running out of the, can I quickly ask you, like, when you had a miscarriage, that experience from that doctor, do you think that a sensitive services you got?
डक्टरले त मलाई केही पनि अब केही मेन्टल केही सपोर्ट गरेको होइन.
तर सेन्सिटिभली मिसक्यारेजको बारेमा तिमीसँग कुरा गरेर यस्तो महसुस गरायो? डक्टर नभनौँ, नट स्पेसिफिक डक्टर, एनीबडी द हेल्थ सेक्टरको कुरा गरौँ न.
मलाई केही त्यस्तो भन्यो, सिर्फ उसले रिपोर्ट पढ्यो भन्यो त्यति हो. अनि ट्राई नेक्स्ट टाइम यस्तो भने कि इट्स लाइक अ लोटो जस्तो के हुन्छ नि, ट्राई नेक्स्ट टाइम.
अनि तिम्रो दिमागमा चाहिँ दिस इज नट सेन्सिटिभ इनफ जस्तो लागेन कि युआर त्यो बेन्चमार्क थियो तिम्रो लागि, ठिकै छ नि त भनेर?
होइन, म आई थिङ्क मेरो एक्सपेक्टेसन केही धेरै पनि थिएन होला सायद, किनभने पहिला नै अब जिपिओकोमा गइरहेर अब उनीहरूको पनि सायद टाइम लिमिट हुन्छ होला, सायद 10 मिनट्स म्याक्सिमम. अनि त्यही माथि त्यो अब कोभिडको टाइम, भर्खरै कोभिड अब लास्ट इयर त हो. अनि एकदम अनि फेरि प्लस त्यो अहिले नयाँ कुरा आएको छ नि त, जिपिओले पनि सरचारलाई त्यो लिने, त्यो भएर ऊ चाहिँ एकदम बिजी भएको भएर एकदम नेक्स्ट टाइपको थियो कि. त्यो भएर मलाई सपोर्टको एक्सपेक्टेसन पनि थिएन र सपोर्ट पाउँदै पनि पाएन. त्यति हो मैले डक्टरबाट.
What about you? Do you remember like you having that sensitive practice around you?
Yes, I did, but my experience was different. So one thing is, women who experience early miscarriages definitely don't get the support that they need.
From the health sector?
Yeah,
I'm specific,
yeah. In my case, because it was later, they were very sensitive. So when they did the ultrasound, and then, because I was in the maternity ward giving birth, so we had, it was like a birth, like we had midwives assigned to us during their shift, and they were all really very sensitive, and they let us hold the baby. They offered that I could stay overnight with the baby if I wanted to, and I know some hospitals actually do like little prints in plaster. So this is all they'll offer to you what you need to process that grief. But there's definitely, I think, a big lack in the way that we support people who miscarry at an earlier stage. This idea that it's nothing, go home, try again.
Should be fine.
But it's actually not. Like your body has just gone through a pregnancy. You have those hormones of pregnancy. There's the mental grief, and it's like, one thing I was talking earlier about how our health system is kind of built on the demographics of a particular population, like usually kind of a middle class white population. it's the same in terms of gender as well. Like the health system is kind of the issues that are prioritised by the health system are usually issues that either impact men and women or impact men. So say like, you know, heart disease, diabetes, like stroke. We all know a lot about these things because they tend to impact men. The issues, especially sexual and reproductive health issues that impact women, we don't tend to know about them as much, and the health system treats them as not as important. So that's why when a woman goes into emergency in incredible pain, physical pain and mental anguish, she's not like, you know, if a man goes into emergency in that much pain, he's going to get seen. Like he's going to get treated.
And Hema, तिम्रो के भन्नु छ म एउटा I think, you know, I just want to add in the grief process, and I don't know, I agree or disagree, tell me guys. The grief process in Asian community is different to the grief process in Australian community, and especially when you have an event like that, especially, you know, बच्चा खेर गएको, that's the word, बच्चा खेर गएको इभेन्टहरू जुन हुन्छ नि, probably I don't know, अब मेरो कोही अझै साथी छैन, मैले एक्सपिरियन्स सेयर गरेको छैन, but my general thinking चाहिँ कस्तो छ भने for them they can easily move on in compared to us. हाम्रोमा चाहिँ कस्तो हुन्छ नि, समाज बुवालाई के भन्ने, बुढालाई के भन्ने, अब समाजले थाहा पाएन के भने दे एक्स्ट्रा, अनि त्यो पनि ग्रिफ प्रोसेससँगै जान्छ कि. इज द्याट ट्रु?
ला मेरो अझै साथी पनि छैन हैन जो चाहिँ प्रेग्नेन्ट भएर भएको चाहिँ नि समाजलाई के भन्ने भनेर चाहिँ नि त्यस्तै भरि त सोचेको छैन थिएन.
अनि समाजलाई के भन्ने भन्नाले पनि मैले रोजीले भनेको पोइन्टमा चाहिँ के एक्सटेन्ड गरेको भने वी हेभ गट अ म्यानुअल अफ वाइट अस्ट्रेलियन हैन, अनि द्याट इज डाइरेक्टिङ आवर हेल्थ सिस्टम, and we are missing a whole chunk of data that is usually should be focused on the population who is exactly getting the healthcare. And that's what I want to say. The grief process is totally missed there, because we are just assuming that the grief process is going to be the same because the Australians are grieving that way. You should be grieving that way too. But in fact, मलाई थाहा छ हैन, किनभने मैले पनि त गरेँ नि त, कृतिकाले पनि गरेको नि त, the grief process is not the same. अब anyway, that's the point.
That's right. So the support needs are not the same. The support needs are still there, but there'll be different types of support needs.
That is exactly right. Now, it's just the right segue to Rosie. Like, you know, what are the available support out there for people who have gone through the miscarriage? Like, is there any organization?
Yeah, there is. Yep. So, first of all, there's an organization called SANS, and they are an organisation that supports people who have experienced miscarriage, stillborn, or the death of a newborn. So they have a 24-hour bereavement line. You can call them on 1300 308 307. So that is so that's a bereavement line. So if you need to talk to someone, then there's an organisation called PANDA. So PANDA is more generally about perinatal mental health. So it's not just for people who've experienced miscarriage, but it's also for people who are pregnant or who are newly parents and growing their families. But I thought that's an important one to mention.
Totally.
Because it's one that so they also have a helpline, which is 1300 726 306. But that's an important one for anyone really, if you're
no problem.
To get pregnant.
Now I think, you know, I've heard of PANDA in a social work setting. They get a lot of you know, referrals to PANDA and SAND. And I've heard a good thing about them. Is there any others?
The others that I wanted to mention, so there was a website released last year called Miscarriage Australia, and that is run by university researchers, and they actually put up that website because they realised people really wanted more evidence-based information about miscarriage. And so that's where you can get your facts about miscarriage.
Don't go to Google.
Don't go to Google. Or if you do go to Google Miscarriage Australia, and then you've got evidence-based facts. And then there's another organisation called Pink Elephant. So if you Google them, they do peer support. So the first, like SANS and PANDA are helplines, so you can call them up and talk to a counsellor. Pink Elephant is they match you up with someone who has previously experienced miscarriage, and so they can support you. The one thing I want to say though is these kinds of organisations, they're not specific to migrant and refugee women. So like you were saying, then they don't necessarily meet the kind of grieving process or the support needs, say, of a Nepali international student.
But just be mindful. And the reason I think probably we are talking about this is we just want to validate that, your journey is not single. Like, the thing is, if you are experiencing unsensitive practice in healthcare sector, there are people who have sent us history, and, in this room too, we have just discussed about that. So do not feel that way. Like, that should not be happening, but it has happened. So probably things will gradually change in years to come. But there are the support networks. Have you got any other things to add on, Rosi, before we wrap up?
No, I just want to say thank you to both of you for this conversation and for sharing both your experiences, and to your listeners who submitted those experiences.
Hema, तिम्रो केही add गर्नु थियो?
मलाई add गर्नु छैन, but I want Rosi Ferry back, because this is only the miscarriage, but there is so many things about breast cancer. I want to talk about breast cancer.
I can actually add one thing, sorry. Multicultural Centre for Women's Health has this amazing multilingual library. So they've got health information on all different topics: breast cancer, diabetes, heart disease,
reproductive,
family violence, in many different languages, including in Nepali. I just thought I'd...
No, that's a very good, that's a very good point. Aru kehi थियो? Cool. And again, thank you very much, especially Hema and Rosi for sharing their story, and me myself too. But also, I think we just don't want to miss our main objective here. I think probably we want to validate the story of miscarriage. We want to share our story to say you that you are not alone. It's not your fault. That was a very good line. It's not your fault. And probably we need to change the way we think about miscarriage. The little changes we need to do ourselves too, including myself, all of us, like, about how we ask the question, how we work around miscarriages, and all that thing. All the partners out there, be there to support your partners too, if they are going through the same journey. भन्दै आजको पोडकास्ट हामी यही सिध्याउन चाहन्छौँ. जसले हामीलाई स्टोरी पठाउनु भएको छ, अझै पठाइरहनु भएको छ, उहाँहरूलाई धेरै धेरै धन्यवाद. थ्याङ्क यू. द्याट्स अ रियली हार्ट टचिङ स्टोरी टु, है. अनि यसले एगेन भ्यालिडेट गर्ने एकदम मद्दत गर्छ. यति भन्दै रोजीजी, थ्याङ्क यू भेरी मच. एन्ड प्रोबेबली आई थिङ्क हेमा इज सो राइट, वी विल बी इन कन्ट्याक्ट विथ यू. आई थिङ्क वी हेभ गट सम भेरियस टपिक अन माइन्ड, सो प्रोबेबली यू क्यान प्रोभाइड अस विथ द डाटा. And best of luck for your PhD. PhD गरेपछि we will hopefully know the results too, and know the outcomes and all that bit. So we will be in contact back then too. Okay. Thank you guys. Thank you.